So my name is Jessica Watruba, and my research review is on chronic kidney disease and protein. So Whitney's going to put an evaluation link in the chat, and if you all could fill that out at the end, I would greatly appreciate any feedback that you have for me. And also, if you could hold any questions until the end, that would be appreciated as well. All right, so why did I choose this topic? I chose this topic because of my grandma. For any of you that know me, that's probably not surprising. I was signing her up for her COVID vaccine, and I had to verify her medical history. And the last thing listed under medical history, it said stage 3 chronic kidney disease. And I looked at her and I said, Granny, since when is this a thing? Like, you never told me about this. And she was like, oh yeah, my doctor told me just to take some pills and that I don't have to worry about it yet. And I was like, worry about it yet? What does that even mean? Like, what can we be doing now to prevent it from getting any worse in the future? And what should we like what can we do now? Be preventative about it rather than waiting until it gets worse. So initially I started looking at, okay, exactly how much protein should she be having on a daily basis? And all of the articles that I read, everything was talking about, well, it was going into lots of different factors that went into it, but most of them came back to, okay, where is this protein coming from? What is the source of the protein? So I redirected my search and wanted to focus on if a certain source of protein had a better impact on the kidney function than another source. So most of us probably have some knowledge on chronic kidney disease, but just to do a quick refresher for those of us that don't work with these patients on a regular basis. So what is it? It's defined as reduced function of the kidneys present for 3 months or longer with adverse implications for health and survival. Essentially what happens is the kidneys cannot properly do their job of filtering waste products. So waste builds up in the blood and causes many negative side effects, and you can become really sick and eventually need to go on dialysis in order to continue living. The complications that come from chronic kidney disease include high blood pressure, anemia, weak bones, overall poor nutritional health, and nerve damage. So this is a really relevant topic to a lot of people because 37 million American adults have some stage of chronic kidney disease right now, and there are millions more who are at risk. So the main causes of chronic kidney disease are diabetes and high blood pressure. So people with these health complications are at a higher risk. Also, groups of people who are at a high risk include people with a family history of kidney failure, African Americans, Hispanics, Pacific Islanders, American Indians, and senior citizens. So the glomerular filtration rate is the best indication of kidney function. A typical GFR for a healthy young adult is about 125 milliliters per minute. A GFR less than 60 indicates reduced kidney function, and a GFR less than 15 indicates kidney failure. Serum creatinine is another test that is commonly done. Creatinine is a waste product in the blood that comes from muscle activity. It is normally removed from the blood by the kidneys, but when kidney function slows down, the creatinine level rises. And also urine protein. When the kidneys are damaged, protein leaks into the urine. A fairly simple urine test can be done to detect this protein. And persistent protein in the urine is an early sign of chronic kidney disease. There are obviously quite a few other tests listed, but these are the main ones that kept coming up in the research articles that I was finding. Some symptoms of kidney disease include feeling more tired, trouble concentrating, poor appetite, trouble sleeping, muscle cramping, swollen feet, puffiness around the eyes, dry, itchy skin, and the needing to urinate more often. There's many factors that go into why chronic kidney disease continues to progress. And first of all, I'm going to explain what a vegetarian diet could be, or how a vegetarian diet could be helpful in regards to hypertension and diabetes, which, to remind you, are the two biggest causes of kidney disease. And then following that, I will explain the effects of a vegetarian diet on all of these factors that affect the progression, and talk about how switching to a vegetarian diet could benefit the kidneys. All right, so for hypertension and vegetarianism, many studies have shown that blood pressure was lower among vegetarians than non-vegetarians, and studies have shown that a switch to a vegetarian diet will lower blood pressure. Vegetarian diets have also been shown to effectively help people lose weight, and they have a lower prevalence of obesity than non-vegetarians. People who follow a vegetarian diet tend to consume less sodium, which also aids in the prevention and treatment of high blood pressure. Studies have shown a high potassium intake related to high consumption of fruits and vegetables is also associated with lower blood pressure. Other studies have shown that higher intake of fiber, especially insoluble fiber, may contribute to low blood pressure, and is known that people following a vegetarian diet consume more fiber than those who follow the typical Western diet. And finally, vegetarians consume less total fat and more polyunsaturated fatty acids than non-vegetarians, and this would also result in a lower blood pressure. In regards to diabetes, the other leading cause of chronic kidney disease, studies have shown that vegetarians are more insulin sensitive than omnivores. Whole grains and vegetables generally have a low glycemic index, and individuals following vegetarian diets are less than half as likely to develop diabetes than non-vegetarians. A study showed that for people with type 2 diabetes, the consumption of a vegetarian diet combined with exercise was associated with a dramatic reduction in diabetes medications and hemoglobin A1C. So these last two slides are very important, because if we can lower the incidence of hypertension and diabetes, then it will in turn lower the amount of people that have kidney disease as well. Okay, so for now, the factors of what progresses kidney disease to keep getting worse. First, we have uremic toxins. For patients with chronic kidney disease, when things take longer to be filtered by the kidneys, this leads to changes in the gut microbiota, which eventually leads to pathogen overgrowth. Pathogen overgrowth leads to increased generation of toxic proteins. These proteins are normally cleared by the kidneys, but when they are not, they accumulate plasma and result in uremia. These toxic proteins are involved in the progression of chronic kidney disease and increase cardiovascular risk, contribute to inflammation, oxidative stress, and insulin resistance, and they are independently associated with overall mortality. It has been demonstrated that the production of these solutes could be influenced by dietary modifications. A vegetarian diet rich in non-digestible fiber has been shown to reduce these toxins in the plasma. Systemic low-grade inflammation favors the progression of renal dysfunction, and it is a major contributor to the complications of chronic kidney disease, such as protein energy wasting and accelerated vascular aging. Nutrients play a central role in the regulation of inflammation, and there is a significant relationship between the type of diet, which shapes the gut microbiome, and chronic low-grade inflammation. Diets high in fruits and vegetables and antioxidants have a lower inflammatory score and have been associated with reduced levels of interleukin-6 and C-reactive protein. Consumption of plant-based diets is associated with enhanced richness and diversity of the gut microbiota, resulting in a better metabolic profile. Conclusion of all this, we know that dietary fiber also has a regulatory role in the inflammatory process. Oxidative stress results from imbalance between excessive production of reactive oxygen species during metabolic processes and the more or less reduced antioxidant defense system of cells and tissues. In a study comparing healthy age-matched omnivores and long-term vegetarians, the long-term vegetarians have a better antioxidant status and coronary heart disease profile. Unlike Western diets that lead to increased oxidative stress, plant-based diets have a low saturated fatty acid content and provide twice the antioxidant vitamins such as A and C. Also, fruits and vegetables contain various phytochemicals such as polyphenols and flavonoids, which are powerful antioxidants and effectively prevent free radical generation. Oxidative stress is present from the early stages of chronic kidney disease and increases as chronic kidney disease progresses. Damage resulting from oxidative stress may influence the progression of renal injury and plays a prominent role in the cardiovascular complications of uremia. Metabolic acidosis, which is observed in the majority of chronic kidney disease patients when the GFR decreases to below 30% of normal, results in several consequences, may be corrected by oral alkali supplementation. For quantitatively identical protein intake, the acid load linked to animal proteins is higher than that linked to plant proteins. Western diets are typically characterized by a high consumption of animal proteins, which increases the net endogenous acid production and tends to worsen metabolic acidosis in chronic kidney disease patients. Fruits and vegetables are base-inducing foods, and increasing their daily intake will lower the dietary acid load and induce results similar to those achieved with alkali therapy. On the other hand, higher dietary acid load is associated with increased incidence of chronic kidney disease and is correlated with the progression of renal failure. Insulin resistance is present at all stages of chronic kidney disease. For the general population, insulin resistance is an independent predictor of cardiovascular events related with impaired vascular endothelial function and is also strongly associated with increased muscle protein breakdown, contributing to protein energy wasting and malnutrition, which are both commonly observed in chronic kidney disease patients. There is a strong possible link between insulin resistance and the progression of renal failure. So the last factor that progresses kidney disease is hyperphosphatemia. Changes in calcium phosphate metabolism, which are partly linked to a positive phosphorus balance, start early in the course of chronic kidney disease. Dietary control of phosphate intake should not necessarily be limited to the phosphate content of foods, but rather the source of the phosphorus. Phosphates derived from animal sources are easily hydrolyzed and absorbed, while the phosphate bioavailability from plants is relatively low in humans. This is because the phosphorus from plant sources is bound to larger molecules and cannot be broken down in the digestive tract. The intestinal absorption of dietary phosphorus is close to 70% in meat eaters, but does not exceed 30 or 40% in vegetarians. And the last point I'll touch on here is food additives. Food additives represent another source of phosphorus that must be taken into consideration in the estimated dietary phosphorus. Phosphorus intake is also reduced in vegetarians because their diet is almost free of these phosphorus-containing food additives that are currently added to a large number of processed foods, particularly meat and poultry. And the phosphorus in food additives has a really high bioavailability as well, so we need to think about that when we're looking at the source of phosphorus as well. So this is pretty much a summary of everything I just went over. A nice visual for us here. Okay. So now getting into my studies. My first study is called the Association of Vegetarian Diet and Chronic Kidney Disease. This was a cross-sectional study that took place in Taiwan. The subjects had anthropometric data taken, fasting blood draws, and they answered questions about their diet patterns and lifestyle habits. The aim of the study was to see if there was a higher prevalence of chronic kidney disease in subjects who followed a certain diet versus others. Excuse me. Based on their answers about their diet patterns, the subjects were split into 3 groups: vegan, vegetarian, and omnivore. So there were 55,113 subjects in this study, all 40 years of age and older. Subjects that did not completely fill out the dietary information were excluded, and people with missing data like serum creatinine and other essential lab values were also excluded from the study. The presence of chronic kidney disease was defined as either the presence of proteinuria or a GFR less than or equal to 60. After determining how many subjects from each group had chronic kidney disease, it was confirmed with statistical significance that both a vegan diet and a vegetarian diet are negatively associated with an incidence of chronic kidney disease when compared to an omnivore diet. This made it clear that a vegetarian diet is a good recommendation for the prevention of chronic kidney disease, although this study was given a D rating due to it being a cross-sectional study and it didn't alter what people were eating. It just looked at what they were eating and then their health status at the time. Strengths of this study are that it had a high prevalence of people following those vegan and vegetarian diets. So it was pretty easy to evaluate the prevalence of chronic kidney disease, and also it was the largest study to date exploring the association of vegetarian diets with chronic kidney disease. Limitations are that the study was done on subjects going in for checkups, meaning that they likely do their routine checkups, and this isn't a perfect representation because we know not everyone in the general population does that. And also there was little information on portion sizes, overall energy intake, and nutrient composition. And also, no dietary assessment is perfect, so these people are self-reporting. They may not have been as honest as they should have been, stuff like that. The second article I looked at was the association of plant protein intake with all-cause mortality in chronic kidney disease. So the researchers in this study knew that plant protein intake was associated with a lower production of uremic toxins and lower serum phosphorus levels. With this in mind, at a given total protein intake, a higher proportion of dietary protein from plant sources might be associated with lower mortality in kidney disease patients. The aim of this study was to see if that was true or not. So this was an observational study that used patients from the NHANES 3, ages 20 and older. Subjects were excluded if they were under the age of 20 or if they had data missing about their plant and animal protein intake from the diet recall. The researchers were comparing the total protein intake and seeing how much percent of that was coming from plant sources versus animal sources. And they placed subjects into categories whether their GFR was above or below 60. There were 14,866 subjects from various places in the US. They had anthropometric measurements done, blood pressure readings, blood and urine specimens done, and they had a 24-hour dietary recall. The kidney function placing them into the group was estimated based on their creatinine-based GFR. So the 24-hour recall was done on a pretty extensive database. There were 165 nutrients in the database they used, and the protein values were calculated from the analyzed nitrogen content of food. Plant protein was defined as the amount of protein contributed by plant products, including grains, fruits, vegetables, legumes, nuts, and seeds. And the animal protein sources were meat, egg, and dairy. The total protein was the sum of the plant and animal sources in that food. So yeah, essentially they wanted to see how much percent of plant sources protein from plant sources people were getting versus animal sources, and then comparing that with their health. So for the results, there were 2,163 deaths over the 8.4-year follow-up. What they found was that for each 33% increase in plant protein to animal protein was associated with a lower risk of mortality. Overall, at a given protein intake, a higher proportion of protein from plant sources is associated with a lower mortality in chronic kidney disease. This study also received a D because it was a before and after observational study. And again, they didn't have people follow certain diets. They were just listening to what the people were saying that they ate or not ate. A few limitations to point out for this study is that the GFR was based on a single serum creatinine measurement, and of course no dietary assessment is perfect, like I said in the other study. Especially with a 24-hour recall, it may not represent a typical day for the subjects, and there is always the chance for over or underestimation and recall bias. The final study was dietary protein sources and the risk for incidence of chronic kidney disease. It was a prospective cohort done in 4 different U.S. communities. The aim of the study was to examine the association between individual protein-rich food groups on the risk of incident stage 3 chronic kidney disease with normal function at baseline. So they assessed protein source intake by having the subjects complete a 66-item food frequency questionnaire. The study had 11,952 adults who were all free from diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and had normal function at baseline, normal renal function at baseline. The endpoint of this study was stage 3 chronic kidney disease or chronic kidney disease-related death or hospitalization. After a 23-year follow-up, there were 2,632 cases of either chronic kidney disease reported or chronic kidney disease-related death or hospitalization. When looking at the subjects that reported chronic kidney disease and referring to the food frequency questionnaire, people that consumed red and processed meat were associated with an increased risk of chronic kidney disease. And in contrast to that, higher dietary intake of nuts, legumes, and low-fat dairy products was associated with a lower risk of chronic kidney disease. This study got a B grade because it was a prospective cohort study. Limitations to this study are that it was white and black adults only. Also, the food frequency questionnaire did not ask much about other nutrients other than protein sources. And also, if dietary habits were changed throughout the 23-year follow-up of the study, the food frequency questionnaire likely did not capture them. This is a strong study, though, because it was a large community-based prospective cohort with a long follow-up, and there was a very structured assessment of the dietary protein intake. Okay, so the take-home message, based on all the information about how a plant-based diet could be beneficial to kidney function and preservation, and based on all the study results, I have been and will continue to advise my grandma and my patients to consume a higher intake of protein from plant sources and to limit red and processed meat as much as possible. Finally, that essentially it's the more plant protein that they consume, the better it will be for their overall health and kidney function. And those are my references. Does anybody have any questions for me? My grandma is doing better. Yeah, so how's your grandma doing now? Is she willing to start more plant-based meals? So she is, well, so they're retesting her GFR and she's getting some more tests done in June. But yes, she has been slowly opening up to the idea of some more foods with, or some more meals without meat. So I've been making some like quinoa salads with black beans or chickpeas, and she's been going on those, and she's been liking them. So yeah, it's a slow process, but we're trying.